Lyra had been trapped in the pit for as long as she could remember. The walls were high, impossibly high, and the darkness was thick. It swallowed everything: her hopes, her dreams, her future. The pit was a place of exile, a punishment worse than death, designed to break the spirits of those who defied her people's strict, unforgiving laws. She had once been a proud member of her kind, an alien race known for their power, their control over others. But Lyra had made a mistake. She had spoken out against the leaders of her people, the ones who ruled with fear and cruelty. For that, she was cast into the pit. For a long time, she had fought against the hopelessness, telling herself that she would escape one day. But as the years passed, the promise of freedom began to feel like a distant dream, fading further and further away. She had tried to climb the walls of the pit at first, thinking she could find a way out, but it was impossible. The stone walls were smooth, slippery, and seemingly endless. No matter how high she climbed, the top remained out of reach. She had fallen over and over again, until her body ached with exhaustion. But even then, she hadn't given up. Time moved strangely in the pit. She couldn't measure it the way she used to. Was it days, weeks, months, or even years that had passed since she had first been thrown down here? Her mind struggled to keep track of time. The only thing that marked its passing was the dull ache in her bones and the soft, distant echoes of her own voice as she cried out to the empty air. She didn't expect anyone to hear her. No one ever did. Her people had long forgotten her. The leaders who had sentenced her to the pit didn't care. They had countless others to rule over, to control. A single alien woman in a pit meant nothing to them. They probably didn't even remember her name. In their eyes, she was just another broken soul, left to waste away in the darkness. And so, Lyra had resigned herself to the endless fall, to the never-ending silence that surrounded her. But sometimes, in the quiet moments between the whispers of the wind, she would imagine a world beyond the pit, a world where she was free again, where she could run through fields of green grass and feel the warmth of the sun on her skin. She could almost taste the fresh air, hear the laughter of children, and see the smiles of those who were kind and gentle. In these dreams, she was not a prisoner. She was a person, whole and free. She could almost believe it was real. And then the dreams would fade, and she would be back in the pit, alone. One day, after what felt like another eternity in the darkness, something happened that Lyra couldn't explain. It started with a strange vibration in the air, a low hum that she could feel deep in her bones. It wasn't like anything she had ever felt before. It was a soft, steady pulse, like the beating of a heart. Lyra stood still, listening to it, feeling the vibrations in her chest. At first, she thought it was just her imagination, but it didn't stop. The sound grew louder, stronger, and the air around her began to feel different. There was something in it, something alive. Her breath caught in her throat. Could it be? Was someone coming for her? No one had ever come for her before. The thought seemed impossible, yet the strange energy in the air made her believe, just for a moment, that something might be different this time. But who could it be? The leaders of her people had long since abandoned her, and the creatures of the pit were more interested in hunting than rescuing. Lyra held her breath, her heart pounding in her chest. The hum grew louder, closer, until it filled the entire pit. Then she saw it, a flash of light above her, brighter than anything she had ever seen in the endless darkness. She squinted, trying to make sense of the light, but it was too far away. She could only see its glow, a shimmer against the black sky. For a moment, she wondered if she was imagining it. But the light didn't go away. It only grew brighter. She scrambled to her feet, her legs trembling beneath her. Her mind raced, trying to understand what was happening. Was someone above her? Had someone finally come to rescue her? Or was it just a dream? Lyra had to know. She had to see for herself. With all the strength she could muster, she began to climb the walls of the pit once again. This time, the rocks beneath her fingers felt different, warmer, somehow, as if they were welcoming her touch. Her hands gripped the stone more securely than they ever had before. She didn't know if it was the energy in the air or her own will, but she felt stronger than she had in years. She climbed, and she didn't stop. She couldn't stop. The light above her beckoned, and she had to reach it. For what felt like an eternity, Lyra climbed, her breath coming in ragged gasps. She didn't care about the pain in her arms or the fatigue in her muscles. She couldn't think about the darkness below her or the depth of the pit. All she could think about was the light. It was so close now. She could almost touch it. But just as she thought she might reach the surface, the light flickered and dimmed. Lyra froze, her heart sinking. Was it gone? Had she imagined it all? Had she only been dreaming of freedom once again? She felt a pang of despair, but she refused to give in. She had come this far, and she wouldn't stop now. The hum in the air grew louder, more intense, and then, suddenly, there was a voice. It was soft, almost like a whisper, but it was clear enough for Lyra to hear. "Hold on, I'm coming for you." The words were simple, but they were enough to fill Lyra's heart with a strange, unfamiliar hope. Someone was coming. Someone was reaching out to her. She climbed faster now, her body moving on instinct, driven by the voice above her. The light grew stronger, and Lyra knew, deep down, that her long wait was finally over. She wasn't alone anymore. Jace had always believed that humans could be more than just warriors, more than just conquerors. His people were known for their strength, their ability to survive even the harshest conditions. But Jace was different. He wasn't interested in power or dominance. Instead, he wanted to make a difference, to prove that humanity could be compassionate, could be kind. That's why, when he heard the legend of the pit, he felt a deep pull inside him. The story was one of punishment, a place where beings were exiled to rot away, forgotten by their people. He didn't know why it fascinated him so much, but something about it stuck with him. The pit had been a secret for centuries, hidden away in the far reaches of space, and no one knew exactly what lay inside. But when Jace heard of an alien woman who had been trapped there for 100 years, his curiosity turned into something else, a need to rescue her, to set her free. It took years of research, days and nights spent searching through old maps, records, and hidden archives. But eventually, Jace found the pit's location. The journey to get there was no small feat. It was a dangerous trip, one that many had tried and failed. Most people had written off the pit as an impossible place to reach. The space around it was full of hazards, meteor fields, strong magnetic forces, and unstable space-time rifts. But Jace wasn't like most people. He was determined. On the day he set out, Jace boarded a small, rugged ship that had seen its fair share of battles. It wasn't the newest or the most advanced, but it was reliable. His crew, a handful of close friends, had tried to talk him out of the mission, warning him that it was too dangerous. But Jace had always been the kind of person who followed his heart, even when logic said otherwise. This was something he had to do, and no one could stop him. As the ship moved through the black void of space, Jace found himself thinking about the woman he was going to rescue. What was she like? What had she endured all those years in the pit? Was she even still alive? He tried to imagine her, someone strong, someone who had survived for a century in the darkness. He didn't know much about her, but he knew this. He couldn't leave her behind. The journey felt like it took forever, even though it was only a matter of days. Jace spent the time preparing himself for whatever he might face. He knew the pit would be full of surprises, some of them dangerous, some of them deadly. But the one thing he didn't expect was the feeling that washed over him when he finally reached the edge of the pit. From the ship's viewports, Jace saw it, a giant, swirling vortex of darkness, stretching far down into the abyss. It was almost as if the pit itself was alive, pulsating with a strange energy. He took a deep breath, steeling himself for what lay ahead. This was it. He was about to venture into the unknown. "I'll be back soon," Jace said quietly to his crew. who were anxiously watching from the ship. "Stay here and keep the engines running. I don't know how long this will take, but I'll make sure we get out." His crew nodded, giving him the usual mix of support and concern. They knew Jace was determined, and no one could talk him out of his plans once he'd made up his mind. He had always been like this, decisive, confident, and unshakable when it came to what he believed in. With a final glance back at the ship, Jace strapped on his gear and descended into the pit. The air around him seemed to thrum with energy as he descended further. The walls of the pit were made of ancient stone, slick with moss and age. It was eerily quiet, and for a moment, Jace wondered if the pit was truly empty, if the stories had been nothing more than a myth. But as he descended deeper, he felt something he couldn't explain. There was a presence in the air, a feeling that something was watching him. As he reached the bottom, the light from his helmet illuminated the darkness around him. He was standing in a wide, empty space, nothing but stone and shadows. His boots clicked on the ground as he walked, the sound echoing eerily in the stillness. Jace felt a strange mixture of awe and fear. What was he about to find? And who had been living down here for so long? Then, just as he turned a corner, he saw her. She was sitting against the wall of the pit, her knees drawn to her chest. She was thin, pale, and her hair was tangled and wild. But there was something in her eyes, something that immediately struck Jace. It was a look of sadness, yes, but also a look of hope. A look that told him she hadn't given up. She was alive, and that was all that mattered. Lyra's eyes slowly lifted when she heard Jace's footsteps. At first, she didn't believe it. Was she dreaming? She had seen nothing but shadows for years. But there he was, standing in front of her, a human, dressed in strange armor, holding a light that pierced the darkness. He didn't look like the others. He didn't look like someone who had come to punish her. He looked different. "Are you real?" Lyra whispered, her voice cracking after so many years of silence. Jace's heart skipped a beat. Her voice was soft, almost fragile, but there was a strength behind it, a strength he couldn't ignore. "I'm real," he said gently, kneeling down to her level. "I'm here to help you. You don't have to be alone anymore." Lyra's eyes widened in disbelief. "Why? Why would you help me?" "Because you deserve to be free," Jace replied, his voice. Jace looked around the pit, taking in the vast, shadowed space. The walls stretched upward, high above them, almost disappearing into the darkness. The pit seemed endless, like a deep wound in the ground that had never healed. There was no way out, no sign of a path leading to freedom. But Jace didn't let the size of the challenge intimidate him. He had faced impossible odds before, and he wasn't going to give up now. "We'll find a way," Jace said with determination. "I've already started looking into it. There has to be a way out of here, and I'll help you find it." Lyra studied his face, searching for any sign of doubt. But there was none. Jace believed what he was saying, and for the first time in a long while, Lyra felt a flicker of something she hadn't felt in years. Hope. "How long? How long have you been here?" Jace asked gently, lowering his voice as he sat beside her. Lyra sighed, the weight of the question making her feel even older than she was. She hadn't counted the years, not really. Time had become a blur, a never-ending stretch of silence and solitude. But now, with Jace beside her, the memory of those long years began to surface. "I've been here for 100 years," she said quietly, her eyes downcast. "I don't even remember how I ended up here anymore. All I know is that I defied my people, and they put me here to punish me. I thought I would die in this pit, forgotten by everyone." Jace's heart ached as he listened to her story. He couldn't imagine the loneliness she had endured, the pain of being cast aside and left to rot in a place like this. He had never known a life like hers. And yet here she was, a woman who had lived through unimaginable hardship, still alive, still hoping for freedom. "You don't deserve this," Jace said, his voice full of conviction. "No one deserves to be forgotten. and I'm not going to let you stay here any longer." Lyra looked at him, her eyes wide. "But how? How can we get out? The walls are too high, and the energy fields around the pit are too strong. I've tried everything. There's no way out." Jace stood up and took a deep breath, looking up at the walls of the pit. He had studied everything he could about the pit before coming here, and he had a few ideas. But none of them would be easy. The pit's energy fields were strong, and there were forces at work here that were beyond his understanding. But he had come this far, and he wasn't going to stop now. "I don't know how yet," Jace said, "but I will figure it out. There's got to be something we can do. We just need to stay focused and keep looking. I won't stop until you're free." Lyra stared at him for a moment, unsure of what to say. Could she really trust him? Could she allow herself to believe that someone, especially a human, would go to such lengths to help her? It seemed too good to be true. But there was something in Jace's eyes, something she hadn't seen in so long. Sincerity. He wasn't lying. He truly wanted to help her. "Thank you," Lyra said quietly, her voice thick with emotion. "Thank you for coming." Jace smiled, a warm, reassuring smile that made her feel safe in a way she hadn't felt in years. "You don't need to thank me," he replied. "We're in this together now." As they sat in the quiet darkness, the air around them filled with a strange sense of unity. For the first time in a long time, Lyra felt like she wasn't alone. There was someone here with her, someone who cared enough to fight for her freedom. And for the first time in 100 years, she allowed herself to believe that escape might be possible after all. The days passed in the pit, each one blending into the next. Lyra had never imagined that anything could break the monotony of her existence down here. Yet with Jace by her side, everything felt different. For the first time in a century, the dark, cold walls of the pit didn't feel quite as oppressive. She wasn't sure how to explain it, but having him there made her feel less like a prisoner and more like a person. Jace was relentless. Every day, he searched for ways to escape the pit. He studied the walls, examined the strange energy fields that surrounded the area, and spent hours tinkering with his equipment. He never gave up, even when things seemed impossible. And for the first time in a long time, Lyra felt a spark of hope. One evening, as the last light of day faded from the sky, Jace called out to her, "Lyra, come here. I think I found something." Lyra's heart skipped a beat. She had grown used to Jace's optimism, but the way he spoke now was different, filled with excitement and energy. She stood quickly, eager to see what he had discovered. She walked over to him, finding him crouched near one of the pit's many walls. His hands were working quickly, moving over a panel of strange, alien technology that she had never noticed before. It was glowing faintly, a soft green light that seemed to pulse in rhythm with her heartbeat. "What is it?" Lyra asked, her voice filled with curiosity. Jace didn't look up as he worked, but he smiled. "I think this is a control panel. It's old, but I can see some signs of power still coming from it. I've been looking for something like this for days, and I think it's our way out." Lyra's eyes widened. "You think this can help us get out?" Jace nodded, his eyes gleaming with determination. "If I can figure out how to activate it, we might be able to access whatever system controls this place. I don't know what it'll do, but it's the best chance we've got." Lyra's stomach twisted with a mix of fear and hope. The idea of escape felt so close now, yet so distant. She had spent so long accepting the pit as her home that the thought of leaving it felt unreal. What if it didn't work? What if they failed? But looking at Jace's face, seeing his unshakable belief that this was their chance, she couldn't help but feel that something was changing. Something in her heart whispered that this might be the beginning of something new. "What do you need me to do?" Lyra asked, stepping closer to Jace. "I need you to help me with this," Jace said, his voice focused as his hands moved over the controls. "These systems are ancient, and it's hard to tell what's what. I need you to stay alert, and look for any signs that something is powering up. If you see anything that changes, let me know immediately." Lyra nodded, her mind racing. It had been so long since she had been part of something like this, working together toward a goal. She had almost forgotten what it felt like to trust someone else, to share in the weight of a task. But with Jace, it felt natural. It felt right. Together, they spent hours working on the panel, pushing buttons, twisting knobs, and testing different settings. The process was slow, filled with moments of frustration and doubt. The ancient technology seemed to fight them every step of the way, but neither of them gave up. They knew that if they stopped now, they might never get another chance. Finally, just as the air in the pit began to feel thick with exhaustion, something changed. A low hum filled the space, and the walls around them seemed to vibrate. Lyra's eyes widened as the ground beneath them shifted, a soft rumble echoing through the pit. "Is it working?" Lyra asked, her voice shaky with a mix of excitement and fear. Jace's face lit up. "Yes, I think it is. This is it." The hum grew louder, and then, with a sudden burst of energy, a large section of the pit's wall slid open. A bright light poured through the opening, blinding Lyra for a moment. She squinted, trying to make sense of what she was seeing. The opening revealed a tunnel, wide enough for them to walk through, stretching out into the unknown. Lyra could hardly believe it. After so many years of isolation, after so many failed attempts at escape, the wall was finally gone. There was a way out, a real way out. "We did it," Lyra whispered, her voice thick with emotion. She could feel her heart racing in her chest. The walls of the pit, the ones that had trapped her for so long, were now behind her. The tunnel before her promised something more: freedom. Jace turned to her, his face full of triumph. "It's not over yet, but we're one step closer." Lyra smiled, feeling a sense of relief wash over her. She had never thought this moment would come, but now it was here. The future, the world beyond the pit, was within reach. But as she stepped toward the tunnel, something caught her eye. A dark shadow moved along the walls, a figure slipping through the corner of her vision. Lyra froze, her heart skipping a beat. "Did you see that?" she asked, her voice tense. Jace paused, looking around. "What do you mean?" Lyra's eyes darted around the pit. There was something moving. Jace stood tall, his senses on high alert. He scanned the area, his eyes narrowing. "We need to be careful," he said, his voice low. "This place isn't empty. We don't know what else is down here." Lyra nodded, her grip tightening around the small weapon she had kept hidden for years. It wasn't much, but it was enough to defend herself if necessary. They weren't alone in this place, and if there was something else in the pit with them, they would need to be prepared. Jace led the way into the tunnel, keeping his eyes trained on the shadows. Lyra followed close behind, her heart pounding in her chest. The tunnel stretched out before them, dark and narrow, but it felt like the first step toward the freedom she had dreamed of for so long. As they moved deeper into the passage, the sound of their footsteps was the only thing that broke the silence. But every step forward brought them closer to a world beyond the pit, a world full of possibilities, full of hope. As Jace and Lyra made their way deeper into the tunnel, the air around them seemed to grow heavier. The walls of the narrow passage were smooth, almost too perfect, as if they had been carved out by something far beyond human technology. Every step they took echoed through the tunnel, but it was the silence that felt unsettling. There were no sounds of life, no whispers of wind, no rustling of unseen creatures, just the quiet hum of their own movements. Jace walked ahead, his eyes sharp and focused. He could sense something was off. The way the tunnel seemed to go on forever, twisting and turning without any clear end in sight, made him uneasy. And though he had been so sure that escaping the pit was their way to freedom, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was following them. Something had been in the pit with them, and now it was watching them. "Stay close," Jace whispered, glancing over his shoulder at Lyra. His voice was low, almost urgent. "Keep your guard up." Lyra nodded, her breath shallow. The faint light from their small hand torches illuminated the path before them, but the deeper they went, the darker it became. The walls seemed to close in, and the air felt colder with each passing step. She could feel it too, the weight of something lurking just out of sight. For a moment, Lyra thought she heard a faint sound behind them, a scrape of something moving against the walls. Her heart raced, and she turned quickly to look behind. But there was nothing there, only the darkness and the stillness. "Did you hear that?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Her pulse was quick, and her instincts told her that they were not alone. Jace paused and listened carefully, his eyes scanning the shadows. He didn't hear anything, but the pit had a way of playing tricks on you. "I didn't hear anything," he replied, but his hand instinctively reached for the small weapon he carried. "Stay alert." They continued walking, their steps echoing in the silence. But as they moved deeper into the tunnel, the strange feeling only grew stronger. It wasn't just the cold or the darkness. It was something else. A presence. And it wasn't friendly. Suddenly, the tunnel opened up into a large chamber, and Jace froze. The light from their torches revealed the vast space around them. The chamber was enormous, its walls lined with strange markings and symbols. It looked ancient, like something that had been lost to time. The air felt thick with mystery, and the sound of their footsteps seemed to reverberate in the emptiness. "Is this a part of the pit?" Lyra asked, her voice filled with awe as she looked around. "What is this place?" "I don't know," Jace replied, his eyes narrowing as he took in the strange symbols on the walls. "But it doesn't feel like any part of the pit we've seen before." They stepped further into the chamber, and that's when they saw it, something moving in the shadows. Lyra's breath caught in her throat as a figure stepped out of the darkness. The figure was tall, with a sleek, insect-like body. Its eyes were glowing a deep, eerie red, and its sharp claws clicked against the stone floor as it moved toward them. It was unlike anything Lyra had ever seen. Its body shimmered in the dim light, and its movements were swift and unnatural. Before Lyra could react, Jace stepped forward, his weapon raised. The creature stopped, its eyes locking onto Jace with an intensity that made his skin crawl. It was as if the creature could sense their fear, feeding off it. "What is that?" Lyra whispered, her voice trembling. "I don't know," Jace said, his voice low, his eyes locked on the creature. "But we don't have time to find out. We need to keep moving." The creature made a clicking sound, its head tilting to one side as if studying them. It didn't seem aggressive at first, but Jace knew better than to trust it. The pit was full of surprises, most of them deadly. "We need to get out of here," Jace muttered. "This might be a trap." But before they could react, the creature lunged forward, moving faster than Jace had anticipated. It swiped at him with its claws, but Jace managed to dodge just in time. The creature's claws scraped across the floor with a screeching sound that sent chills down their spines. "Run," Jace shouted, pushing Lyra toward the exit of the chamber. His heart raced as he turned to face the creature, determined to protect Lyra at all costs. They had come so far, and they couldn't let something like this stop them now. Lyra didn't hesitate. She sprinted ahead, her footsteps pounding against the stone floor as she followed Jace toward the tunnel they had come through. But the creature was fast, faster than anything Lyra had ever seen. It was right behind them, its claws clicking as it chased them down. "Jace, it's gaining on us," Lyra cried, panic rising in her chest. "I know," Jace replied, glancing over his shoulder. "We need to make it to the other side of the chamber." They ran with all their strength, their breaths coming in quick, sharp gasps. The creature was still behind them, its presence like a shadow that loomed over them. But just as they reached the edge of the chamber, Jace spotted something, a narrow passageway that seemed to lead deeper into the mountain. "This way," Jace yelled, veering off toward the passage. Lyra followed without hesitation, But just as they entered the passage, they heard the creature's screech behind them. It was close. Too close. The passage was narrow, but it was their only chance. Jace urged Lyra forward, his mind racing. The creature was still out there, and they needed to find a way to lose it. The walls of the passage were tight, making it hard to move quickly, but Jace didn't let up. "We can't stop now," he said through gritted teeth. "Keep going." Lyra's heart was pounding in her chest, her legs aching from the run, but she pushed herself harder. They couldn't afford to stop. The creature was relentless, and they were running out of time. They turned a sharp corner, and the tunnel opened up once again into a larger space. Jace stopped, his breath coming in ragged gasps as he scanned the area. He had to think fast. They couldn't keep running forever. But then something caught his eye. At the far end of the chamber, there was another control panel, similar to the one they had found earlier. This was their chance, their only chance to escape. "Lyra, over there," Jace shouted, pointing toward the panel. "We need to get to that panel." Lyra nodded, her face pale but determined. Together, they ran toward the control panel, their only hope for survival now resting on whether they could activate it before the creature reached them. The echo of their footsteps reverberated off the walls of the tunnel as Jace and Lyra sprinted toward the control panel. The air felt thick with tension. The creature's screeches were growing louder with every passing second, and its pursuit was relentless. They had no time to lose. "Almost there," Jace called, his voice strained with exhaustion. His eyes darted around, searching for any way to slow the creature down. But there was no time for tactics now, only survival. Lyra's breath was coming in ragged gasps as she pushed herself forward. Her legs burned, her body aching from the strain, but she couldn't afford to stop. Not now. Not when they were so close to the only chance they had left. They reached the control panel, a large metallic surface covered in strange symbols and buttons. It seemed just as ancient and unfamiliar as the rest of the technology they had encountered in the pit. But Jace didn't hesitate. He stepped forward, quickly assessing the panel, his hands moving over it with practiced speed. "Help me look for something," Jace shouted, his voice sharp. "We need to activate it before that thing catches up to us." Lyra nodded, her eyes scanning the panel in a mix of fear and determination. The symbols were unlike anything she had ever seen, but she recognized one thing. There were buttons, lots of them. Some were glowing faintly, while others were dark, as if they hadn't been used in centuries. Without thinking, Lyra pressed one of the glowing buttons, and immediately the chamber shook. The ground beneath them trembled, and the lights overhead flickered to life, casting an eerie glow on everything around them. A low hum filled the air, and for a moment, the control panel seemed to come to life. "Did you do that?" Jace asked, his eyes wide with surprise. Lyra nodded quickly. "I think so. Keep going." But the creature's screeches grew louder, and Lyra could hear its claws scraping against the stone floor. It was getting closer. They didn't have much time. Jace's fingers flew over the buttons, pressing one after another. The hum grew louder, the lights brighter, but nothing seemed to be happening fast enough. He could feel the creature's presence in the air behind them, its dark energy closing in on them. His mind raced. Was there a hidden fail-safe? A way to override the system? Come on, come on," Jace muttered to himself as his fingers moved quickly over the panel. He needed a miracle. Then, with a sudden click, a large section of the wall beside them began to shift. Slowly, a hidden door slid open, revealing another passage beyond. Jace's heart raced with hope. This could be their escape. The panel had done something. It had opened a way forward. "Lyra, get in," Jace shouted. "Now." Without looking back, Lyra darted into the newly revealed passage. Her feet pounded against the stone, and her heart pounded in her chest. But she didn't stop. She couldn't stop. Behind her, she could hear the creature approaching. It was closer now, its form becoming more defined in the dim light. Its glowing eyes locked onto her as it moved faster, more determined than ever. "Jace, hurry," Lyra called over her shoulder, panic rising in her chest. Jace followed quickly, but as he did, he turned to face the creature. He wasn't sure why he did it. Maybe it was because he wanted to make sure Lyra got through safely, or maybe it was just his instinct to protect her. But he raised his weapon and aimed it at the creature. The creature screeched, its sharp teeth glinting in the dim light. It lunged at Jace, its claws outstretched and ready to strike. Time seemed to slow as Jace took aim, his hand steady despite the danger. He fired. The blast hit the creature square in the chest, sending it reeling back with a deafening roar. For a moment, it seemed stunned, but then with a snarl, it regained its footing and continued its pursuit. "Go," Jace shouted, his voice filled with urgency. "I'll hold it off." Lyra hesitated for a moment, her eyes filled with fear. "No, you can't stay." "I'll catch up," Jace said, his voice firm but filled with an edge of desperation. "Just go." Lyra didn't argue. She knew they had no time to waste. With one final glance at Jace, she turned and sprinted down the passage, her heart heavy with fear and uncertainty. Jace watched her disappear into the darkness, his grip tightening on his weapon. The creature wasn't giving up. It was still coming for him, but Jace wasn't about to let it catch Lyra. Not after everything they had been through. The creature lunged again, but this time, Jace was ready. He fired once more, hitting the creature in its side. It howled in pain, but it didn't stop. It seemed relentless, almost invincible. Jace's heart raced as he backed away, trying to give Lyra more time. The creature advanced, its claws scraping across the floor. But just as Jace was about to fire again, something unexpected happened. The walls of the passage began to shake once more. The ground trembled, and the ceiling above them cracked. Jace looked up in surprise. Was it the control panel? Had Lyra activated something else? The creature hissed and shrieked, its eyes wide with confusion as the entire chamber began to collapse. The walls shifted, and massive chunks of stone began to fall, blocking the creature's path. With a final roar, the creature was trapped, its movements slowed by the falling debris. Jace didn't waste another moment. He turned and ran toward the passage where Lyra had gone, his heart pounding in his chest. The tunnel was still shaking, but he couldn't stop now. He had to reach her. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Jace caught up with Lyra. She was waiting for him at the end of the passage, her face pale but determined. "Are you okay?" she asked, her voice filled with concern. Jace nodded, his chest heaving with the effort of running. "I am now," he said, offering her a reassuring smile. "We're almost there. We're going to make it." Together, they turned and continued down the passage, the sounds of the collapsing chamber fading behind them. The future was still uncertain, but for the first time in a long while, Jace felt a sense of hope. They had survived, and no matter what came next, they were ready. The tunnel seemed to stretch on forever as Jace and Lyra ran, their steps echoing through the dimly lit passage. Their breaths were heavy, their bodies aching from the sprint, but they didn't dare slow down. They had come too far to stop now. The collapse behind them was a reminder that there was no turning back. The further they went, the more they began to feel a strange sense of calm. The tunnel ahead was clear, its walls smooth and unbroken, almost welcoming after everything they had endured. It was as if the pit had finally decided to let them go, offering a way out. "This feels different," Lyra said, her voice soft but filled with wonder. She glanced around, her eyes scanning the tunnel. "Like we're finally out of the worst of it." Jace didn't reply at first, his mind still racing with the events of the last few hours. The creature, the collapse, the near escape. It had all happened so quickly. But Lyra was right. The air felt lighter now, as if the danger had passed. They were almost free. "I think you're right," Jace said, his voice calmer now. though there was still a sense of urgency in his steps. "But we can't stop yet. We have to keep moving." Lyra nodded, her heart still pounding in her chest. She couldn't help but feel the weight of everything they had been through. They had fought for their lives, faced dangers they couldn't have imagined. And yet, here they were, still standing, still together. As they continued down the tunnel, they began to notice something strange. The walls, once smooth and dark, were now covered in faint markings, symbols that glowed softly, like ancient carvings left by a forgotten civilization. The air felt charged with energy, and Lyra couldn't help but feel a strange connection to the place. "This place," Lyra whispered, her fingers lightly brushing against the walls. "It feels like it's alive, like it's been waiting for us." Jace glanced at her, sensing the change in the atmosphere. He had felt it too. The tunnel no longer felt like a cold, empty space. It was as if it had a purpose, a destination. They were close to something important, something beyond their understanding. They walked in silence for a few more minutes, each step bringing them closer to whatever lay ahead. The tunnel began to widen, and soon they found themselves standing before a massive door. It was made of a strange material, smooth and metallic, but with intricate designs etched into its surface. The door was unlike anything they had seen in the pit before. "This is it," Jace said, his voice filled with awe. He reached out and placed his hand on the door, feeling a faint vibration beneath his fingers. "This is the way out." Lyra stepped beside him, her eyes wide with wonder. "Are we really free?" Jace didn't answer right away. He could hardly believe it himself. After everything they had been through, after all the dangers they had faced, the thought of finally escaping seemed almost too good to be true. But standing before the door, he felt a sense of certainty. This was the end of their journey in the pit. A new chapter was waiting for them. He pushed gently on the door, and to their surprise, it opened with ease, revealing a bright light beyond. The light was warm and welcoming, like a new dawn breaking after a long, dark night. Jace stepped through first, followed closely by Lyra. As they crossed the threshold, they found themselves standing on the edge of a vast, open field. The air was fresh, the sky clear and bright above them. The landscape stretched out for miles, with rolling hills and distant mountains, all bathed in the light of a golden sun. It was nothing like the cold, dark pit they had left behind. It was a place of life, of possibility. Lyra gasped in amazement. This is real. We made it." Jace stood silently beside her, his eyes scanning the horizon. He had imagined what freedom might feel like. But this was something else. It was beyond anything he could have dreamed. For a long moment, they stood there, taking in the beauty of the world around them. The peace of the open field, the warmth of the sun on their faces. It was everything they had longed for during their time in the pit. "This is a new beginning," Jace said quietly, his voice filled with wonder. "We're free, Lyra. We've made it." Lyra nodded, her eyes shining with tears. "We've made it," she whispered. "After all that, we're free." Jace turned to face her, his gaze softening. "You were the reason we got out," he said, his voice full of sincerity. "Without you, I don't know if I would have made it this far." Lyra smiled, her heart swelling with gratitude. "We did it together," she replied. "We're a team. Always." The two of them stood together, looking out at the endless possibilities ahead of them. The world was vast, and though they didn't know exactly what the future held, they knew one thing for certain. They had each other. And in that moment, it was enough. The path ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in years, Jace felt a sense of peace. The past, with all its struggles and hardships, was behind them. Now the future was theirs to shape. Together, they stepped forward, hand in hand, into the bright unknown. Whatever came next, they were ready.